We're going to kick off here talking about Mariana's new book and about the individuation arc in the majors. So it's going to be an exciting time,
Mm-hmm.
right?
My favorite topic to talk about with tarot.
Cool. All right. Looks like we got some people coming in. All right. So officially, everybody, welcome. I'm very excited today to welcome Mariana Louis. If you are not familiar with her work, check out Persephone Sister on Instagram, persephonesister.com. Mariana is an archetypal tarotist, and she has a brand new book coming out, her first. And I would love for us to just kick off with you talking a little bit about the book. Tell us when it's coming out. Tell us about your approach and anything else that you want to share.
Yeah, well, thank you. First of all, I'm really glad that we're doing this. For those of you who know me but haven't interacted with Alyssa before, Alyssa is a really good friend of mine and also one of the most smartest Jungian people that I know. She does dream work and tarot stuff and all sorts of things. So if you're following her, do that definitely. Um, So yes, I have a book coming out. It is coming out on March 2nd. That is the date that we have. And it is called Tarot and the Psychology of the Soul, Exploring the Archetypal Mirrors of the Psyche. And it is all about reading the tarot with a depth psychological perspective, or we could say a psycho-spiritual perspective. And what I really wanted to do with this book, I mean, there's 1.5 million guidebooks out there. I'm not going to try to compete with Rachel Pollack. Again, I'm not, she's the OG. But I really wanted to have something that wasn't only a guidebook, and it definitely has, that element of um, going through card by card and discussing what it means, especially through a depth psychological lens, but also really guiding people through how to use this approach, like how to read the cards this way.
Yeah.
So the first half of the book is all about depth psychology. What is it? How the psyche works, understanding the conscious and the unconscious minds. And then there's chapters with like practical techniques using things like active imagination. I have a shadow work technique that I've developed that's in there. Then we talk about the cards themselves and we talk about them as a broader story as well, which is something that we're going to talk about today. And then the last part of the book, there's spreads, obviously, as there are in all tarot books generally. And I walk you through, like, how do we apply this archetypal approach and how do we read the cards in this way? So it's like a little bit of like a it's like a little bit of like a how-to, a little bit guidebook, and a little bit just like kind of philosophical reflection.
Yeah.
So I'm very, very excited for it to come out and also extremely nervous because there's always the thing in my head of like everyone's gonna hate it.
No, no.
But I worked really hard on it, so hopefully not. And yeah, it's already available for pre-order too, so people can get it. I think wherever you get books is generally available for pre-order, but it's also on Amazon, which is usually the easier
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, and I'll be including link to the pre-order when I send the recording out. So your book is kind of based on this approach that you developed with the
Yeah.
cards, like in the archetypal tarot approach. And I'm just curious about how that came to be, what drove or what inspired that approach to the cards, because you didn't always read that way, right?
Yeah. No, I began with Jungian psychology before I ever interacted with the tarot. I found like my origin story I always like to say is that I was like wandering around my grandfather's attic and he had thousands of books and I found the Jung section and I was like, I better read one of these because I've heard about this guy. And the smallest one was The Undiscovered Self. So
Yeah.
that's the one I picked up.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, actually that's really good. And so
It's small but mighty.
it is small but mighty, and I was like, "Okay, well, this changes everything." And then I went down the rabbit hole, and I studied Jung, and then I went to Jungian analysis, and I was doing that for a long time. And then I got a tarot reading one day, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is a thing, and now I need to go explore this." And
Yeah.
eventually, so I had the Jungian like ground before I really even thought about tarot. But when I started reading for other people, I read it the way that you're taught in general guidebooks how to read it.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
really know how to merge those two things yet. And then I was reading professionally for a little while, like semi-professionally. And at some point, I was like, I hate doing this. I hate read I hate this. I am anytime someone books a reading with me, I feel that like, oh feeling. And I
Yeah.
was like, why do
Yeah.
I feel that way? And I took a month off. They said, I'm going to sit down and really think about what I believe about
Yeah.
like the nature of the psyche and the soul and how I think about the world and think about the cards and do this work of
Yeah.
actually marrying them together. And then I did that, took a little bit of time. And then the next month I relaunched my business and said,
Yeah.
I now just do archetypal tarot readings. This is what I'm calling it.
Yeah.
And that month I booked out completely and I was like, I love this. I love doing this. This is so cool and it's so amazing how this works together. So it was an effort of like I have to sit and focus
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
really figure out what this process looks like and how these things work together. Which then later down the line, I realized, oh, I have all of this material. Like, I have this like record I kept of my studying, and how I put this together. And so that then became the approach that I started teaching.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think what's so cool about tarot is it can really kind of shapeshift and morph into all of these different expressions, and it lends itself really well to, say, applying a psychological approach or doing a more classic divinatory approach, or even like broadening out into like connecting it to other archetypal systems like alchemy or astrology. And that's because we're really speaking the language of symbol.
Yeah.
And tarot, we say, at least from this approach, sort of arises from the collective unconscious. And I imagine that has something to do with the idea that you draw upon in the book, that the majors speak to this arc of individuation, that within the cards, even though they were created hundreds and hundreds of years ago, we see the same sort of psychological process happening that at least Jung talks about with individuation. Would you say that's true? Like you kind of began to notice those individuation themes within the majors?
Yeah, absolutely. I always kind of worked on it the way that Rachel Pollack kind of outlines in her book, where she's like, "Oh, we have like the first 7 cards or like the childhood stages of development, and then we have
Yeah.
like the adolescent stages and then adulthood." And I always like I thought that there's a lot of really interesting ideas in that. But then the more I thought about the way Jung talked about individuation, the way we experience it, I was like, there's something else in this patterning of cards. And then I kind of realized that, yeah, we have that first 6 major arcana of the magician through the lovers,
Mhm.
really showing these paired, I call them the primordial powers, like the paired
Yeah.
dichotomy of masculine and feminine and how we experience it from the macrocosm to the microcosm. And then starting with that chariot card as number 7, we see the individuation, strengthening of the ego,
Yeah.
which then all of a sudden is the crash of the ego and the
Mm.
confrontation with the shadow.
Yep.
And then that leads to transcendent experience and reconciliation with the self. And that's a lot of how Jung kind of talked about the individuation process. And on a much broader scale, right, than the tarot kind of shows us moving through all of these things all the time.
Yeah.
Whereas Jung was like, this is the whole big lifetime arc. Um, but kind of folding in that perspective, it was just so amazing how the tarot really lines up with that story
Mhm.
perfectly,
Yeah.
and tells the story and then tells us, like teaches us how what that looks like. And so it gives us more context for understanding how that individuation journey can really be experienced.
Yeah. Do you place the fool outside of that, or as the sort of participating, force that's moving through or meeting each of those majors, or do you couple it in with, any particular section?
Yeah, I put him at the end. I think
Okay.
he's the very last because the way I think about it is, when we get to the world, of course, this is like the meeting of the mystical self, right? In
Yeah.
the whole universe, in this big, huge individuation moment of everything coming into wholeness that we never really get to, but we're always trying to get to. And then in my, in my experience, my way of thinking about it, it's only after we approach the world that we understand the authentic self
Mm.
truly and can
Yeah.
live as that. So I like to put the fool at the end.
Yeah.
And then he reinitiates the whole thing to start again.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's there all the time because he is the authentic self in my understanding, but I really like coupling him with the world. I think that they go together.
Yeah. So by authentic self, are you kind of talking about Jung's like capital S archetype of the self?
Yeah, the like as much as we can be in communion with that capital S
Yeah.
self, right?
Yeah.
Which I don't think we ever really can be fully, but that's the goal. That's what we're always trying to get to is living as close to that as possible.
Yeah. What do you think about the approach with the Fool sort of being this, I don't know, a kind of archetypal child, or even this sort of like moving between realms, perhaps connected to the self, but also something that might be like a little bit more grounded, even like closer to the ego perspective? Do you see, that the Fool kind of contains all of those facets, or at least with your approach, do you just lean into more of it, representing that authentic self, as you said?
Yeah, I lean more into the fool as the archetype as of the authentic self. There are so many other like writers who have talked a lot about other ways of interpreting the fool that I like a lot. Like if you're reading Sally Nichols,
Mm,
classic
mhm,
Jungian tarot book, she really goes into the trickster element of the
yep.
fool, and yeah, exactly, there it is, voila. And I thought about kind of adding that element and thinking, because I've certainly have in readings seen that come up and
Mm,
read the card that way. But I thought this is a way of reading the card that hasn't been as discussed. So I really kind of lean into that approach
yeah.
more.
I don't know if you agree with this, but a lot of times I really see the trickster more present in the magician
Yeah, totally.
than than the fool. And I get it because we think, oh, he's a fool, he's a jester.
Yeah.
He's the that aspect that can kind of go in and break down some seemingly rigid structure or something like that. But more times than not, especially in readings, I see that playing out more in the magician. Um, and I mean, someone kind of casting magic and playing with illusions is also a trickstery element. But I think the name of the Fool kind of almost captures our attention to like concretize this idea of trickster with the
Hmm.
Fool, when I think it really tends to, like, I don't know, burst to life in the magician.
Absolutely. I talk a little bit in the book about the Mercurius and how
Yeah.
he's represented in The Magician, and very interestingly, that alchemical figure was
Yeah.
like this big mystical figure, and then also like a weird trickster guy who did
Right.
weird little things and was like a little imp who like came in and like messed things up. So I do mention that, like how the magician has that trickster nature to him. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the first part of how you break down the majors as this kind of meeting with primordial powers. So can you walk us through a little bit of that idea?
Yeah. So I think that masculine and feminine are words that we use a lot now, and a lot of people kind of go ugh, too, because they're just like, what does this mean? I think the tarot gives a really good example of what they mean for us. So
Mhm.
the way that I think I see the first six cards as the progression of these powers from the macrocosm to the microcosm. So
Yeah.
like from the greater kind of God arena to like our human experience. So with the magician and the high priestess, I really see them as these paired powers of like the cosmic spirit and the cosmic soul, or the world spirit and
Hmm.
world soul.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I like using like this sort of alchemical way of thinking of the difference between spirit and soul. Spirit being this experience that kind of can lift from the body and rise to the heavens and be that channel, whereas the soul is the very much embodied experience, the thing that gives us life, that animates us, that connects us to the unconscious wisdom. And so
Yeah.
we see that dichotomy, and then we take a step lower to human experience with empress and emperor, mother and father, right? Like
Yeah.
nature and order. And then when we get to the Hierophant and the lovers, this is probably my most controversial opinion, but I really believe in it. We
Hmm.
see like the embodiment of Logos and Eros as lived principles.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
we
Yeah.
have the Hierophant as Logos, who says we learn stuff, we invest in knowledge, we get teachers, or we study doctrine. This is how like Logos tends to function through reason. And then the Eros, these are Jungian principles, by the way, for people who don't know those two terms, that are ways of describing masculine and feminine. And the Eros experience is connection and relationship and love. And so we see that very much in the lovers. And what's really interesting to me, that I've like spent so much time pondering and have not gotten to an answer, and maybe you have an idea, is how the Hierophant and the Lovers, most people don't pair them together, but they're side by side in the deck.
Or yeah.
And then the devil comes on the other, like as number 15, all the way on the other side of the like story.
Right.
And he mocks both of them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, he does.
He has the lovers chained, and then he's also sitting like the Hierophant, and he has his hand in like this opposite. I can't do it, so I can't do that.
Yeah, he's like holding that same hand of benediction that the Hierophant does. Okay,
I was like, they're paired, they're together. The devil is telling us something about how they belong together, and he mocks them both. I've never, like, I think about this a lot, and I have ideas, but this is like one of the big tarot mysteries that I'm fascinated by. I'm like, why did we do that? Why is that what it looks like?
Yeah.
So anyway.
So, do you think that it creates a sort of almost like portal or bridge into that section of individuation, like almost as if there's like this back door through? Because if we're moving sequentially after the Lovers, we're not hopping over to the devil, and yet there's clearly this symbolic resonance, or this kind of sympathetic relationship between them, and in that way, you kind of like hyper jump over to the devil. And it just makes me wonder about what are the moments where the movement from Hierophant and Lovers takes you into the devil. And not necessarily that you'll always like skip over, Chariot and Strength and Justice and all that, but still there's clearly something there, perhaps like a shadow of those dynamics. And if I think about the devil as a sort of shadow of the Hierophant and shadow of the Lovers,
Yep.
that feels very interesting too.
Right? I know.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like those are the two places where we feel like we learn the most about
Yeah.
our lived experience. Like with
Yeah.
the Hierophant, we're literally learning. We have some kind of aspect of reading some kind of book or receiving some kind of knowledge. And
Yeah.
with the Lovers, we think we're in relationship, we're learning about the other person, we're learning about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then the devil kind of comes in and is like, you don't know anything.
Yeah.
You didn't learn anything. So that I don't know, like it's just one of these interesting things. Like I really believe that the development of the ego begins with the Chariot in terms of how the Major Arcana tells the story, because the Chariot is the ego self, like in the chariot, in the vehicle of life.
Yeah.
That libido energy is moving forward. It's like, okay, we're becoming someone, and then we have strength and the Hermit and the Wheel of Fortune, which are all things about strength, surviving the trials of life and the
Yeah.
trials of our own instincts. And the Hermit saying, let's explore inside our own inner experience a little bit deeper. And then the Wheel of Fortune saying, okay, and then life's going to turn you upside down. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to survive that? And then I really think Justice is the fulfillment of this ego development, where it's like, now I can sit and judge how my life experiences are happening and weigh
Yeah.
them and find some kind of balance in them, and then also wield the sword of discernment and choice. And then the hangman comes in and is like, screw all that. You have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then we just tumble deeper, deeper into shadow. But there is this thing with the devil, like hiding out, like all the way over there is like, I'm coming.
Yeah.
You think that you got something. And one of the things, I think it's Yolanda Jacobi says that the development of the shadow runs parallel to the development of the ego. So the more that we build up the ego, the more that we're building up shadow at the same time. So it's almost like this little hint of like, you don't know anything.
Yeah.
Get ready.
Yeah. I find this idea of the Chariot kicking off ego development really fascinating, because if I tie that to dream work symbolism, vehicles of movement, which might be anything from a car to being on a horse, or yes, like in a chariot being drawn by some animals, speaks to generally ego volition, movement, where libido is flowing.
Yep.
Do you feel in control? Do you feel out of control? And it's often this really deep commentary on the ego's will and your capacity for forward movement or what's stuck. And I think that's one of the clearest, most common symbols that tend to come up to really speak to where ego focus is, or where development tends to be moving in this really kind of direct, sort of like hands-on sense. And when I think about certain ways that the development of personality is spoken about with the majors, it tends to be like kicking off, from card 1 is where they say it
Yeah.
happens. And so I'm enjoying this sort of flipping on its head because I think it's actually really in alignment with a lot of those other archetypal principles.
Yeah. And then once we like that was one of the reasons I kind of had that idea about the chariots because I don't know what book I was reading, some like probably one of June Singer's books or something, like one of these older Jungian people, and she
Yeah.
was I think it was June Singer, and she was talking about the how the ego is expressed so often in dreams with vehicles and this feeling
Right.
of
Yeah.
not moving or moving too fast or
Yep.
and I was like, oh wow, we see that and that's the
Yep.
chariot card, right?
Yeah.
That's the ego trying to navigate itself forward. Um and and it works so well when we get to that point of the hangman and see that descent into shadow. It's so reflective of like the story of Inanna that we
Mm,
hear about, you know, as Inanna is undressing herself in order to get into the underworld and
yeah.
then she has to meet the shadow sister and all that stuff. And this is the same process we see from the hangman of like inverting the ego's control and then going through death and killing off, you know, parts of the ego that we thought we knew. And then we have this temperance moment, which I think is really beautiful. We see in myth all the time of like after the death experience, there's a purification. There's an angel who
Mm,
comes in,
yeah.
or there's a psychopomp figure who comes in and says, like, oh, you're not done yet, actually. You have to
Yeah.
face the enemy or the villain or the shadow. And then we have the tower, which after we get through the devil and everything, the tower says, oh, look at your life. That's not real anymore, is it? That's not really what you thought it was. It's got to come down. And then after that, we get into with the star, we reunite with something that is pure, that numinous experience of self, right? That is beyond the ego. And then all of those following archetypes lead us toward transcendent experience with that culminates in judgment and then the world and then reinitiates us back into life with the fool.
Mm,
So yeah, I feel like it mirrors at least the Jungian perspective of
yeah.
individuation really, really well.
Yeah. Where for you does encountering the shadow begin for the majors?
I really think it starts with the hangman because I think
Mm,
that I mean, we do have a little bit of it with the Wheel of Fortune if we're experiencing the Wheel of Fortune in a really negative way.
yeah.
Um, and we do see hints of it too in the chariot with, you know, he's between the light and the dark sphinx when there is definitely shadow and ego kind of at war with each other a little bit there. But it comes full it really in our face when the hangman says, I am completely inverted. My whole
Mm,
understanding of self is totally upside down. And so the ego is all about self knowledge. And
yeah.
so when the ego's sense of self knowledge is no longer grounded and sure, then we have no idea who we are anymore. And so that
Yeah.
is that beginning of the encounter with the shadow.
Hmm. And then where do you take that to? Like up until the tower falls, or even I know sometimes um, people like to really talk about the moon as like
Yeah.
also kind of bringing you into shadow and the unconscious. So where does that section end for you?
Yeah. I think it ends with the tower because once life falls, after that we have this moment of encountering the star, which is so refreshing and so honest and tied to our more essential experience of self. And then we have with the moon that comes right after, I think that a lot of times we kind of demonize this card because
Yeah.
it speaks to irrational unconscious experience, which to us is like, what do we do with that? That's horrible. We don't want that. But I don't think there's anything malicious about the card or
Yeah.
shadowy really. I mean, it is nighttime because we're in the lunar space, we're in the unconscious space. But
Yeah.
the thing that I think is most significant is that we see the 2 pillars that are first spotted in the death card. And
Yeah.
so we're right at the precipice of actualization and self-understanding.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think we're on the rise. Like it's not like we're totally at the transcendent awakened experience yet, but I do see a shift in the pattern out of the realm of shadow into that path towards transcendence once we get to the star.
Yeah. One thing that I like to do with the moon is kind of draw upon this idea of shadow as the entirety of the unconscious experience and not so much like the dark side of the ego personality,
Yeah.
which, depending on what you read in Jungian literature, you might only hear about, shadow is, your unlived life. It's the aspects of yourself you ignore, repress, or have never, developed into the ego structure. And it's von Franz's Shadow and Evil and Fairy Tales that just like totally blew my mind, because she opens with this quote about how Jung was so annoyed with all his students who were like, "Oh, the shadow is this," and they hold on to this one rigid idea and they like make a whole, they put it on a pedestal and they forget about all the nuance. And he threw up his hands and he says, "The shadow is just the whole unconscious." And I was like, okay, so if we broaden this idea that shadow is just everything that's out of the light of our awareness, to me the moon fits so perfectly
Yep.
into that concept of shadow as unconscious experience, because the disorientation, that sense of almost disillusionment, the things that are rising from the depths that we fear and yet there's this kind of draw to.
Yep.
And at that same time, and I think so you would put this in more of like the archetypes of like the transcendent, experience, right?
Yeah.
It also fits with shadow as this like driver of transcendent experience, or how the meeting of that kind of produces like the transcendent function that can
Yeah.
develop something out of shadow. And so, I always try to remind people of that,
Yeah.
in my writing in classes, because we were like, oh, the shadow is just this one thing. It's the dark side of the personality. And it's like,
Mhm.
it's this whole thing. It's the
Yeah.
whole
It's
unconscious.
huge. I like to connect the moon to Jung's Red Book phase, because
Mm,
like that
yeah.
is very much his descent into shadow. He's
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
into a lot of weird places in his psyche,
Yeah.
but they were fruitful and
Yeah.
beautiful, and
Yeah.
scary,
Yep.
and led to basically the sun experience when he came out of it, of like, oh my God, this is my psychology like laid
Yeah.
out here. I can
Yeah.
see it all, and I can see it with this crystal clarity that only the sun can produce. And it was only because he surrendered to all of the confusing, nearly psychotic, crazy stuff that was going on, which was not shadow in the traditional sense, as you're saying, of
Mm,
like, oh,
yeah.
dark, ugly stuff. I mean, he did encounter the devil in that period and he encountered a
Yeah.
lot of dark things, but he also encountered beautiful maidens and and interesting like hidden monsters and all sorts of powerful unconscious
Yeah.
images that were very, very illuminating.
Yeah.
And so I really think of that's how we can experience the moon in the best way, if we can surrender
Yeah.
to it, which we very often do not, and we very often fight against it.
Yeah.
Um, but it can be our best friend if we can say, well, something something is going to be learned here. I
Yeah.
mean, it might be scary for now, but it's not going to be. Eventually, we get to the sun and it becomes clear.
Yeah. How do you view the movement out of the moon into the world? Because it's sort of an interesting step into this kind of rising vitality and expansion of self with the sun. But then you get judgment, with kind of, to me, always like knocks you back down a couple pegs. And
Yeah.
then you reach this sort of point of relative stability, with the world. What do you think?
Yeah. Actually, the judgment is probably one of my favorite cards, because
Mm,
I think that, when we're thinking about like the transcendent function as an idea, which is a very hard idea, I think, to wrap our heads around, because Jung talked about it in a lot of different ways. And
yeah. Yeah.
it's like, it's a bunch of different things at once. But one of the ways that we can think about it is like this sudden change, right? The unconscious produces something and we're like, whoa, boom, we're somewhere else and we have a different understanding of life. And
Yeah.
I do think that that's sort of what we're experiencing in judgment. We've done a
Mm,
lot of work. We go
yep.
through the moon, we go through the sun, we have clarity. And then there's like this feeling of awakening or
Yeah.
redemption that
Mm,
happens. And it can be sudden. And I think that we see that in the symbolism of blowing the horn, which is this classic image of like, boom, here's the sound, here's the moment.
yeah.
But on the other side of it, I think that judgment is about judgment too. And when we're changing, when we're really individuating and growing, we can do all of this work and face the shadow and go get the sun's illumination and understanding of self and all this stuff. But if we don't take responsibility
Yeah.
for who we've been, which I think is the
Mm,
hardest point of the arc, then we don't
yeah.
really get to the other side of it. So it's Judgment Day in the Christian myth says you have to go and claim your sins.
Mm,
Symbolically, you have to go and say, yeah, I was this person. I made those choices. I
yeah.
don't didn't know why at the time, but now I do. I have all this understanding and now I have to take accountability or forgiveness or whatever it might be. And I see that being a very important moment of the process that a lot of times we just skip over because it's like once we get the revelation, everything's great. It's like I remember when I first started my analysis, I did really get to that, like, moment of, like, "Oh, I see myself, and I see this pattern I've had, and I see all these things," and it I was stuck there for months because I couldn't forgive myself for it and
Mm,
ask for forgiveness from the people that my complexes I hadn't seen had harmed and,
yeah.
created difficult things in relationships and all that stuff, and I realized, like, this is one of the most important parts of the journey that we all kinda wanna pass.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, "I don't wanna have to do that part." I just want to change and have the revelation.
Yeah.
So, that's what I really do think that judgment is super important, and whenever I'm reading for a client and I see it inverted,
Mm,
my, like, little antenna go up, and I'm like, "We don't wanna we don't wanna take accountability even if we have learned a lot and
mm,
can make that, like, final push toward, 'This is all my fault,' even
yeah.
though it also isn't, but it also is." So it's very heavy.
Yeah. I feel like sometimes with these themes, they're just so intense, so powerful, and at the same time so inaccessible because they're majors,
Yeah.
and for me, I sort of define majors in relation to minors as the most like broadly archetypal. And I see every card, as archetypal. And I think sometimes when we struggle with these cards, it's because we've yet to build like more of this dynamic, more personal relationship to the archetype, that's present. And when that happens, I sometimes think that it's really helpful to pull some minors. Like even if
Mhm.
you like went through your deck and pulled out all the majors and just went through and randomly then pulled some minors to support you because the accessibility of those, sometimes the practical action that's implied can really help you answer that question of, well, where is the resistance, or why have I not been able to take that accountability? Do you agree? Do you sort of see a similar
Absolutely.
dynamic?
Yeah, I do. I really think that there are these huge ideas that, can leave us feeling like, well, what do I do? We're
Yeah,
so
yeah,
oriented all the time to like, what do I do? How do I fix that? What
yeah,
I like to do, I've offered this in some of my classes in the past, is to give like a correspondence chart that I've created. So it's just my own. It's not like
yeah,
a religious thing that's like out there. Like you can find it of like major arcana and what minor arcana might expand on that idea.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
That's
for
interesting.
example, the moon, I'll pull out the 8 of cups
Yeah, I was gonna say.
sometimes and really get there's a very obvious one. Even with the hermit, you could also do the 8 of cups.
Mhm.
Or, if we're thinking about the judgment card, we can certainly look at something like the 10 of swords even, of like,
Yeah.
what are all these things that I've been carrying in my back that I maybe have let be there for too long and maybe I need to take them out of my back. So I do like kind of having this correspondence that it feels a little bit more accessible. But I do like you know, they are huge archetypal forces.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be they're not going to like I hate when people are like, so what does that mean? Like what do I do?
Yeah.
When you
Yeah.
pull like, the strength card, I'm like, be strong. I don't know. What do you want me to tell you? Like it's I mean, there's a lot that we could talk about and think about, but it's not just gonna like be like tie it up in a bow and there you go and you're
Yeah.
done. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was listening to this Hillman lecture recently. He was talking about these like kind of very Western, especially like American sensibilities of like, so what do we do about it? Because all the
Mhm.
therapists in the crowd were like, okay, so I get what you're saying, but how do I apply that? And he's like, it's not the point. Just
Yeah.
sit with it. Let it move you. Let it shape you. Let something actually emerge. And I think in our grasping, we
Yeah.
actually lose the sort of very subtle, very implicit ways in which the unconscious or these archetypal structures are speaking to us. And I think that that's one of the downfalls of the ego is we so want the entirety of the psyche to speak in our language of our day world language, literalism, easy categories, definable ideas, all of these concepts that we can wrap our mind around and meaning that we can draw from it. And I think the more that you work with systems like tarot or other archetypal systems, the more that you realize the insight kind of comes in the mystery
Yeah.
or in the subtlety or in the spontaneous images, of the dreams.
Yep.
And then we go, okay, well, what does it mean? And, what's the insight? And I want to hold attention here because I think you actually can draw the insight and you can put words to it, but our quick jumping to it, I think
Mhm.
kind of it kills the relationship.
Yep.
And it's more of that releasing and sort of meeting somewhere in the middle between conscious and unconscious where like the magic starts to happen.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. That I mean, I in my book and also in the Archetypal Tarot School, I have a spread that I assign, which is just I call it like the conscious subconscious. I don't even know. I've called it a million different things, but it's basically just one card. This is your conscious experience. This
Okay.
card is your unconscious experience. That's it. Don't pull anything else. Don't pull any clarifiers.
Hmm.
Don't ask for more questions. Just sit with that. Sit with
Yep.
the tension of it. And
Yep.
I always instruct my students to look at how these things are talking to each other. If we read them as separate entities, then we're totally missing the point of tarot.
Yeah.
There's always a conversation happening. So what is this conscious experience saying to the unconscious experience? Are they in agreement?
Yeah.
Are they in conflict? Do they have nothing to do with each other? Like, this is where it's interesting.
Yeah.
And where we're stuck is usually where there is something that's like really fruitful to
Mm.
discover. I have a whole section in the book about this, but like I think that if we're looking to get an answer from the cards we pull, then we're going about it all wrong. And the approach should be to find the better question,
Yeah.
question that we didn't know we were trying to ask in the first place. So we might have said like, why did this job fall through? Like,
Yeah.
why did that happen? And the real question, the cards will get us to the better question, which might have been, why do I need some kind of validation, right? Like, why do I need this so badly?
Yeah.
Why can't I just make a change, because I need to, or whatever it might be? So, that only happens when we allow them to marinate and to sit
Yeah.
and to reflect on the images and the archetypes and not try to like the work begins after the reading. I always say this. It begins after
Mm.
we're done with it. We sit and we look and we maybe journal or whatever for 10 minutes. And then we're going to walk away and we're going to keep thinking about it. And that's the point.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it's really common in readings, both for oneself or if you read for others, to sort of have this experience that the cards haven't necessarily given you answers as you had been seeking, but sort of kind of I don't know, it's kind of taken all of these aspects that you've been exploring and reconstructed them in a new way. And suddenly you're watching it from a new vantage point, and that gives you some insight or it gives you a bit of clarity. Or as you're saying, I think it gives you new questions that you have to ponder with, but it often doesn't feel frustrating, or maybe it
Yeah.
does. I don't know, but it feels expansive. Maybe that's the right word.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think once again, if we can kind of like let go of that rigidity of like ego desire and ego control to like have a particular outcome and instead to kind of meet what's arising from the unconscious through the cards, then what we get is, as you said, like new versions of our questions, but they tend to be more refined. And that might eventually lead maybe to a greater clarity or an answer or something like that. And I wonder if you think that, does part of getting that out of a reading require us to come to the reading itself with a pretty well, how do I say this? Like, refining your question so that you're sort of starting from like the right
Yeah.
place?
Yeah. It's interesting. I kind of take it the opposite way. And I always say we should broaden our questions, make them
Mm.
more open ended. I
Yeah.
think that the broader the question, the more room for interpretive adaptability.
Yeah.
When we come and we're like, okay, I'm feeling really anxious about this particular thing, and I want to ask, why am I so anxious about this particular thing?
Yeah.
That might be great, but if we can broaden it, but then, we might get like the Three of Cups, and then we're like, huh? What?
Yeah.
What? So if we can broaden a little bit and say, I am seeing this experience as creating a lot of anxiety, and I just need a new perspective
Mm.
on what is happening, and we step out.
Yeah.
Seeing something at the Three of Cups will still be confusing, but then we might be like, okay, well, what is that perspective, or where can I? There's more room to interpret the card in a way that might be kind of unexpected or different.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think that the should be very careful not to make your questions too narrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Though they can be focused on something. It's not like you can't focus on an area of your life. I really don't, also at the same time, I don't believe in no questions. I
Yeah.
don't believe in going to the cards and saying, I don't have anything in mind.
Yep.
Give me whatever you like. And then it's like the devil and the tower inverted. And you're like, oh, damn, that's very bad. I don't, what does that mean? And then we're not really reflecting on like, well, you know what? I've not been feeling much like myself lately, or I've
Yeah.
been feeling very uncomfortable with this particular situation. There's always something going on in the psyche.
Yeah.
And so we do want to have an idea of what that looks like and where the energy is moving. I
Yeah.
really hate when I get a client, you probably hate this too, and they're like, everything's fine. I'm like, well, why are you
Is
here?
it?
I also don't believe you. I'm sure like things are fine,
Yeah.
but also there's something that's not fine because you're still individuating, you're still alive, and so
Yeah.
there's still going to be conflict in the psyche. So what is it? Just tell me so I can tell you what the cards are saying. Otherwise, we're just going to dance around it for 45 minutes until it just outs itself anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I feel like when I read for myself, my version of like the most broad, like non-question is what should I reflect on today?
yeah,
And being kind of surprised by the cards that I draw but being very honest about where it takes me. But I find that that's just much more effective on a personal level than if a client comes to me and says like, I don't know, let's just see what comes up. And it's like, well, then I've got to like do a lot of legwork to even find where it comes up for
absolutely.
you.
Yeah.
And not that that's not useful at all, but I think that we can jump into it a lot quicker when you've got that anchor point.
Yeah,
And I think that's helpful.
I totally agree. It depends on your level of self-awareness. Like if you
Yeah,
are
that too.
generally pretty grounded in what your personal experience is, I think it's a little bit easier to come to the cards and say, I want you to kind of guide me to what's going on inside of me today and where the energy is
Yeah.
moving. But
Yep.
if you're the kind of person who uses like tarot are not oracle cards,
Yep.
and
Right.
I think that these things are really should be seen differently. Oracle cards are excellent for like, give me a little encouragement today, or like,
Yep.
who knows what's the vibe today? That's oracle. But when you're working with the tarot is going to tell you some stuff.
Mm.
So we have to like kind of root ourselves a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we don't have that level of self-awareness all the time, then we have to give a little bit of an intention, I think.
Yeah. People aren't scared of oracle cards, but they sure are scared of tarot.
They should be scared of tarot. I don't I don't this is I know I'm like the worst tarot like teacher. Like it's not the kind of thing that we should use. I don't think divination across the board should be used lightly. I
Yeah.
think that it's not like it's scary and like gonna tell us bad things and that's why we should be scared. It is tapping us into heavy experiences,
Yeah.
really
Yeah. For sure.
profound experiences.
Mm.
And so, if we just want a card that says trust divine timing, then that's
Yeah.
lovely. But the tarot is not going to give us that. It might give us the, Wheel of Fortune inverted,
Yeah.
where instead says life is not going to happen the way you want it to. How do you deal
Yeah.
with that?
Yeah.
That's your
Yeah.
challenge, and that's big, and that's a lot bigger than like, something just soft and supportive like that. So we just have to that's why I always tell my students, like, don't read I mean, you can have a daily practice, but I generally don't recommend if you're not really grounded in yourself
Yeah.
to have that kind of practice where every day you're pulling tarot cards. It might be every week, maybe once a month, to keep it really aware of your like mental health and how prepared you are for that inner reflection. Because sometimes that's not the thing that we're ready for. So we don't always have to do it. It's not a tool that we have to use religiously. I know that when I'm in places where I'm not mentally strong, I'm like, no cards for me for a while
Yeah.
because I'm not going to
Yeah.
be able to take strength inverted coming up and feeling like, oh God, I'm not going to be able to handle these things that are coming. And how do I reflect on that like void of strength in me right now? Like if I know that that's too much for me, then
Yeah.
I have to kind of put the deck down for now and just kind of gather my bearings. I think that's really okay.
Yeah. I think that's where leaning back into the Jungian approach is really interesting and also super supportive because the need for ego strength and stability to do the work, whether on a more independent, personal level or engaged in analysis, with the therapist, it's so important to have that strong center because as you engage the unconscious, as you open that veil, you don't know what's going to come up. And if you have a weak ego, if you've got wounding, you fall in the
Yeah.
presence of that unconscious force, and that's kind of what tarot does. You pull a card, and it opens that portal into the depths through the symbols. And I think it's still a fairly gentle way to engage the
Hmm.
unconscious. Rather than some other means that you might engage in through like an analysis session, but
Yeah.
still it has the capacity to just break you open. And so if you're starting to feel, that sense of instability, the sense of overwhelm, to me, that is like, as you're saying, that invitation to step back, strengthen ego, resource, take a break, you
Mhm.
know, and work on sort of fortifying, the conscious perspective, because ultimately that's what you've got for navigating this entire journey.
Yeah, yeah, you're so right. And I think that, when we think about ego strength, a lot of times to people who haven't like really grounded themselves in Jungian psychology, that idea seems kind of like a just contradictory in itself because it's
Yeah,
like, well, don't
for
you want to
sure.
break down the ego so that we can
Right,
get over the
exactly.
ego? And yeah, the idea is that we kind of transcend the limitations of the ego and connect to shadow and connect to the archetypal self and all this. But if the ego, like our sense of identity, looks at the shadow and is like, okay, I need to stop existing because that's so horrible. I can't deal
Yep,
with it anymore.
yep,
Then we don't have enough of that ego strength to manage it. We have to have enough ego strength to say, I can be challenged. I can allow that I'm gonna see ugly things about myself,
yeah,
and I'm gonna be able to survive it.
yep,
And that's we're not always in that place. And,
yeah,
so it's important to be aware. This is why we do therapy, right? Because
yep.
we have someone, like, watching us and checking on that level of, ability to manage that. And tarot is not therapy. I actually have a Substack post coming out tomorrow about is tarot therapy. Did you see that New York
That
Times
New York
opinion
Times,
piece?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. So I have some thoughts on it. I have a piece coming out tomorrow. So I've been thinking a lot about like, is tarot therapy actually? Is it just, are we just
Mm,
self therapizing? And in a way we are. And something that James Hillman says is that therapy is therapeutic, but everything we do is therapeutic as
yeah,
long
yeah,
as if we're engaging with ourselves in a analytical way,
yeah.
we're engaged in the soul making process, which is
Yeah, I like
therapeutic.
that. Yeah.
So it comes with some responsibility.
I was gonna say tarot is therapeutic, but it's not therapy.
It's not
And it's
therapy, guys.
yeah,
I
yeah,
know it's not therapy. Just
mm,
just a public service announcement. Don't
yeah.
fire your therapist and buy a tarot deck.
Okay, keep an eye out for that article coming tomorrow. Okay, we're going to close out soon. So this is your time, everyone, to drop a question if you've got one. I think there's one here from Brooke I want to read out. She says, thinking of star, moon, and sun, could it be a reconnection to our authentic self, capital S, after the trials of death, devil, tower, into the star with its pure essence? Then we get to know our shadow, unconscious, and light consciousness in an enlightened way.
Yeah, I definitely see that that process of like we move into the
Mm,
celestial bodies with the star, moon, and sun.
yeah,
So we're moving out of personal experience and into transpersonal experience,
yeah,
right? So we have that progression toward light. Um, so it's very much, yeah, you can definitely see it as a little bit of a mirroring of like this moving toward darkness and then this progression toward light. But I think that remembering that those are transpersonal experiences, and by that I mean that they're personal to us because how we're experiencing them, but they're
yeah,
bigger than us.
yeah,
Um, I think that that's helpful.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, part of the question seems to also be implying this connection to self, which we tend to most associate with like the final ending. But
Yeah.
I think with your structure, you're saying that we're meeting these archetypes of transcendence and kind of walking this path of wholeness once you hit the star, right? Is that where it
Yeah,
kicks off? Yeah.
we even it's even hinted at with the hangman.
Yeah.
Hangman
Yeah.
has a corona, he has a crown showing that this is a holy experience that he's going through.
Yeah.
So the inversion of selfhood, of egohood, I should say,
Yeah.
is a holy experience that is
Yeah. Yeah.
sanctified. So it's
Yeah.
like we hint at that even there.
Yeah.
And then the temperance certainly has a numinous quality to it, like an angelic quality.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's hinted at, but then it I really do think it begins with the star when we're like, okay, now we're oriented toward the self.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Someone's asking me to show the book that I did earlier. Probably it was this one. So, Tarot and the Archetypal Journey, Union Path from Darkness to Light by Sally Nichols. This is like the newer version. What's the
that's the new
other?
one. I have the old one.
Tarot
Yeah.
and the Jungian. What's it called? You might see two
Just Jung and
versions.
Tarot.
Jungian
I don't
Tarot.
know.
Yeah.
There's
There
probably
you
a
go.
subtitle, but I don't remember what it is.
Yeah. We also talked a bit about Rachel Pollack's 78 Degrees of Wisdom. And then next year, March 2nd, there will be Mariana's book on this shelf. So make sure you guys pre-order it. As I said, I'm going to have the link for that in the recording, which will be sent out shortly. So make sure you order a copy and support Mariana and her work.
Thank you. And make sure to check out what do you have coming up too?
This month in the membership, we're doing a read along of Jung's Memory Dream Reflection. So it's like every month in the membership, we do an inner work deep dive theme and a workshop. Next month, I guess, like here's a sneak peek, we're doing a kind of tarot for beginners workshop. So that'll be coming up soon. But there's always lots of exciting things happening here at the Artemisian. So make sure to subscribe if you aren't.
Absolutely. I'm going to join you for that read along. I think I told you.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, one last question here. How did the two of you form this partnership? Oh, that's cute. It feels like you have very strong, unique beliefs, but also at the same time have a kinship of character. It's true, Mariana.
I know.
Um,
We met on Instagram,
I know,
like millennials.
like 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know. We were just probably got recommended each other's profiles or something,
Yeah,
and one of us followed
yeah,
the other one and then commented on something, and we're like, "Oh, wow, you get it." And
yeah.
then we started exchanging tarot readings at some point.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
And then we co-taught at one point. We did a
Yep.
class on fairy tales and von
Mhm.
Franz. So it's like, the interesting ways in which the internet kind of connects you to other people with some sort of similar quality of character and spirit. And there's definitely a few others out there
Yep.
who kind of exist in that circle as well. So it's been a gift, getting to know you.
If there's one good thing about Instagram, it's that we met.
That's
So there's that.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining in. As I said, recording is going to go out shortly, and make sure to pre-order Mariana's book. All right. We'll see you later.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.